Assalamualaikum. Welcome to Candid Talks, organized by MCOB, Allied Muslim Chamber of Business. MCOB is a membership based social enterprise with a mission to create a thriving Muslim business community. It's the power of collective wisdom, continued learning, and thought leadership brought together for Muslims by Muslims. Our core belief is that business leaders thrive when they have access to a supportive community of peers who challenge and inspire each other. Today, our guest is Margari Hill. Margari is the executive director and co founder of MuslimARC. Based out of Southern California, Margari is an award winning anti racism educator, nonprofit leader, writer, and speaker. Welcome, Margari.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Please share with us your journey. What inspired you to build MuslimARC and to work in the field of anti racism?
Yeah, so my background is as an educator. I've worked in higher education, but also in K-12 for Muslim-led Islamic schools, weekend programs at all levels. And around 2013, when I was teaching at Delaware County Community College, we had noticed some of the online representations of Muslims and some of the ways that our youth were replicating some of the harmful narratives. We saw anti-Blackness online, especially the response to Trayvon Martin's murder. And we saw that there was a lacking within the national civil rights work that was happening within the Muslim American community, but also the ways that the media was depicting Muslim Americans, that there was this erasure of African American Muslims who make up 20% to, as you know, some of the figures are as like from 20% to a third of American Muslims, but also sub-Saharan African Muslims. So Black Muslims globally represent a large portion of the population. And then when they would show Ramadan or Eid, it would just be, there would be that lacking of the representation of the diversity of Muslims globally. So we felt like we needed to make that intervention. A group of leaders, which include our co-founder Namira Islam, who's Bangladeshi American, we decided to launch during Black History Month to make that intervention, to shift the narrative. And we decided to hold a hashtag called Being Black and Muslim. That hashtag itself, we didn't expect for it to trend globally for 24 hours, just to hear from Black Muslims across the world. And with that hashtag, it began that needs assessment. It said that there was something that was systemic, something that we had to make some interventions within our institutions and do more than just have social media campaigns, but work to develop education strategies that could really shift how we dealt with each other.
Okay, all right. I'm going to ask you a very specific question
Mhm.
about how do Title VII EEOC regulations shape the work of Muslim Arc, and what are some common misconceptions organizations have when trying to implement DI policies that align in with these regulations?
Yeah, so with a lot of times when we think about the EEOC or, like thinking about anti-racism, some people say, "Oh, well, Islam is not a race. How do they experience racism?" But what we do know is that most Muslims are coming from places where they're from the global south, right? They're racialized. But there's also the overlap of our identities. And so the work to prevent discrimination based on religion, national origin, race, include those who are perceived to be Arab and Israeli, Jewish, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and Palestinian. So right now, what we have with especially with this administration, um, of looking at how Title VII, um, and even Title VI can we can um, push for our rights, right, for discrimination, but it can also be weaponized against people of color. So, right, like certain discussions that people can have can actually lead to complaints. But when we think about the Title VII, right, of disparate treatment, that doesn't have to be outright hostility or jokes. Like it could be the subtle forms of discrimination, and that's where people have to be kind of mindful. It could be acts like where people feel excluded or isolated. A harassment, like an environment that creates harassment, doesn't have to be outright bullying or physical threats. It could be creating an environment where people feel hostility or that they are targeted. And then retaliation, that can look a lot of different ways, right? When so I think we have to be kind of mindful as far as like when there's an investigation and being open to resolving the conflict. The other thing that we have to be mindful of is that with the EEOC, is that a lot of the cases after 9/11, a significant portion have been Muslims, right? Muslims have had many of their rights violated. And some of those challenges could be like accommodations for Ramadan and Eid. And that can be difficult because some people do the moon sighting and sometimes it's on a calendar thing. And so those are the kind of challenges and just getting breaks for prayer time. It's more than just wearing the hijab, right? It's like the prayer space, having the breaks for prayer time, the ways that people network and how Muslim employees are excluded. Another thing that we need to understand around EEOC is that, especially since we have Muslim businesses or people of color led businesses, that these suits can be brought against each other, right? And that there are Muslim employers that have gotten EEOC complaints um,
Okay.
for lack of inclusion, so none of us are immune to to the EEOC complaints, and that we need to be mindful around best practices, and also learn, what we can do to protect our small businesses from nuisance complaints, because that is also something that we have to, stay abreast of how this can play a part in our own businesses, and what we need to do to make sure that we have best processes in place, and measures like making sure that we have good insurance and legal counsel, so that when we're dealing with conflict between employees, especially intercultural conflict,
Mhm.
that we can resolve it in a way that's amenable for all parties and can save us on costs, because it does cost small businesses and nonprofits a lot.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the changing landscape.
Mhm.
How has the landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion evolved over the past few years, particularly regarding the inclusion of Muslim professionals? And what trends do you
Mhm.
anticipate in the near future?
Definitely. I mean, with 2020, there was that huge push, right, towards DIA, a lot of commitments. And so that lasted for a few years, right after George Floyd and during the pandemic, where many corporations, they established whole departments, hired a lot of people of color, hired a lot of women, right, to do the kind of work. And then subtly, like, it started to shift. A lot of the big corporations started to kind of, when the interest waned a bit, and that there was this growing right-wing pushback around DEIA. So we're dealing with backlash against DIA and a rollback in many states across the country, where certain terms, we can't talk about, right? Or that there have been lawsuits against certain initiatives, right? There was a recent one around a venture capital fund that was meant to provide opportunities for Black women, and that has been sued. So there have been lawsuits around different initiatives to bring about racial equity. So people have had to think about the structural issues that impact historically marginalized communities, and work around that without necessarily discriminating against uh, white people. So that's something that we have to really think about in the landscape. And now with the elections, right, like there's a 900-page plan around that's Project 2025, which is really meant to bring about like more conservative changes within society, within the government sector. So for a lot of people, who've worked on civil liberties, racial equity, they're looking at what programs will be gutted, right? What government programs, and what does that mean, right, for people who have been given contracts because of the encouragement around women-led businesses, right, with the government. There's going to be implications for color businesses led by people of color. So, all around, we're all going to be impacted in some kind of way. And
Mhm.
so there's still more that we have to know and understand, and ways that we can still work to build our resilience as people coming from very diverse backgrounds. But it's definitely going to be a shift in the landscape in the next not just 4 years, but for many years to come.
Mhm. How do these challenges can be effectively addressed? The
Mhm.
challenges that you are foreseeing there maybe in the near future.
I mean, in some ways, the ways that MuslimARC has approached doing DEIA is not just performative. It's not about the quotas, right? So we are not ones where our measure of success is not based on quotas, but it's really based on processes, right? Processes to address intercultural conflict, processes of ways that people can talk to one another that affirms their humanity. And
Mhm.
so some of the things that we saw that were really harmful around around like how people were calling in or calling out people, right? Those, we found that to be more toxic, as opposed to really understanding how do stereotypes play a part into how people are targeted or alienated in the work environment. How does that affect their performance? And so for us, it's not just policy, but culture, and creating places where we could have honest conversations and courageous conversations, and not just censoring people or being punitive, right? If somebody makes a mistake. So, like, we don't want people for just a complaint to be lodged, and then now they're fired because they made a honest mistake. But how do we show somebody, like, inform them that maybe a statement that they said
Mhm.
or an action that they took, how did that harm an individual, or harm the organization's culture, or our commitment to values of equality? And so for us, it's really about the process of resolving conflict and creating mutual understanding. So that's been very important for us, in our own approach of addressing racial inequality, of addressing racial discrimination, and
Mhm.
even religious discrimination.
Would you mind sharing some of the, like you talked about putting
Mhm,
together the processes. What are
mhm,
the best practices that you have seen in organization, or Muslim Arc has had
mhm.
implement those practices within organizations to foster genuine diversity and a sense of belonging?
So for us, part of that is like really empowering individuals to both reflect on the types of narratives that they've been taught about various people, like
Mhm.
things that we may see in the media, and to unpack how does that shape how we treat other people, right? Like those kind of stereotypes. And so to do the kind of work for ourselves um to do away with the guilt, because there's a lot of guilting, right, in this work. So
Mhm.
moving beyond the guilt, but understanding how we've been pitted against one another, but importantly is like providing everyday tools on multiple levels. So for example, like when we do our work on anti-racism competency, we focus on the 4 I's of systemic oppression. So that's internalized. Well, the first one is ideological. So those are like the stereotypes and common ways we talk about individuals.
Mhm.
And so we work on kind of identifying, mapping those out about the various groups. And then, but then we look at what's been internalized. And so that we have exercises of exploring how we think about the dominant groups, those are historically marginalized. And importantly, for like the interpersonal acts of discrimination, right? We have some trainings on bystander intervention, how to start the conversation. And so using compassionate communication for calling in people, of alerting people to intervene, right? Like, so our strategies for intervening are meant to be very like compassionate, open, leading with curiosity, leaning with deep empathy, and with a way that we can still maintain our relationships. And it really assumes goodness in people. So that kind of compassionate communication. We've utilized some of like, there's an organization called Hollaback that uses the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. So of incorporating that within workplaces and also in the classroom, and finding ways that we can either directly address something in clever ways. So we've done role plays, and then when people come back and they share with us like, hey, I saw this thing and I was able to intervene and we resolved the conflict, and we saw that this teacher or this employee was actually mortified to learn that what they said, that offhanded joke, was really harmful. And they were able to apologize and they committed to learning. And then finally, with the policy work of some of our most successful wins have been in supporting staff to develop mutual guidelines for resolving conflict. So, or even establishing um, guidelines for how they're going to organize meetings in a way that was inclusive. And so, when they come back and say, like, "Hey, we've utilized these guidelines to have very difficult conversations and to come together and to repair harm," and to, because like a lot of times we're dealing with people who are feeling silenced, right? And so when people feel heard and respected, they are a lot happier in collaborating with the team and moving forward. So for us, the policy change, it's not just about what's written on paper, but how people implement that. And so working with organizations over the years, we can see some of those changes, and that's been really, really empowering for us, um, as an organization, to see, like, to work long term with them as they've worked to implement the broader strategies for systems change.
Okay. When you talk about the working with the communities, are there any specific approaches that you would mind sharing to take initiative in
Mhm.
creating inclusive spaces, both within and outside the workplace?
Yeah, part of what we really emphasize is the concept that comes from our faith tradition, which is shura, right? Consultation. And so even before you begin your DEI initiative or your initiative to be more inclusive, of speaking with the people who are most impacted, of talking with people, of hearing about how they're feeling around discussions, right? How they're feeling around decision making and a power in your organization. So you start with the people who are at the margins, and then you work, towards the center, right? And so when they're included early on in the decision making process, and when that's transparent, so working on transparency is also very important. So for us, a lot of times it is that the self reflection. So we utilize like some of the strengths of cultural competency, those of self-reflection. So doing the self-reflection work and constantly incorporating that, of getting the feedback, looking at rubrics, developing some rubrics and standards for what we want to achieve, and then having those 360 evaluations from everybody. That includes your interns, whatever level, and just making sure that everybody is heard in that process. So I would start with that. And then going through the learning process, right, of really understanding the issues deeply, and then making sure that we're including the accountability part. And the accountability part is really working on not just being punitive, but repair, making sure that people feel heard, and that we can, that they feel seen, and that there are not just performative apologies or silencing, like sweeping it under the rug, but really working to say, like, hey, here is something that did go wrong, but this is how we're going to work to repair that thing, how we're going forward, what we've learned from it, and how we're going to redress that harm.
Okay. In your in your work, um, how much do you collaborate with other organizations and institutions to amplify the message of inclusion and counter workplace bias?
From the beginning, we've always been a collaborative. We cannot function like without our C, like MuslimARC is a collaboration. We include our partners on every step. And so part of that is like for us, even developing our curriculum is through those partnerships, developing our work, and then also working in deep partnership to whether it's dealing with a pandemic. So we
Mhm,
were part of the National Muslim Task Force, and
mhm,
helping all of the organizations, because we were online from the beginning. We started out as a virtual organizations, and all these brick and mortar organizations had to move all of their conventions and programming online. So we worked with them to do that, to shift and serve the needs of our community. Our partnerships includes grassroots organizations. We typically do the political education. So, for example, when we're doing community-based education, we do the frameworks change. And then our other organizations, whether they work in advocacy, they're doing
mhm.
the campaigns. And so for us, it's so important to have partnerships, and that's where we provide the kind of capacity and frameworks, and making sure that our organizations are inclusive and we have processes to address intercultural conflict. But at the end of the day, it's like the people that are doing the work are the grassroots organizations or the direct service providers, and the educators. They're doing the day-to-day work, and we're coming in to support them in, on the back end of bringing people together to have those tough conversations.
Okay. And related to Muslim Arc, like Muslim Arc
Mhm,
has been here for almost 11 years.
mhm.
Are there other organizations that are working towards the inclusivity of Muslims?
Oh yeah, there are so many amazing organizations that do this work, and this is where we uplift their work, right? But our work is a little bit different in that it is really, it is, I know, like, there's the Muslim inclusion, right? We want to include Muslims in organizations. And the reason why we've worked a lot with social impact in education institutions is that as an anti-racism organization, our goal, right, is to make, support organizations in becoming locomotions for racial equity, of like where we're addressing this from like a systems change. And so organizations like Islamic Networks Group, there's a Council of American Islamic Relations, there's Rise Sisterhood, there's so many other like partner organizations, and a lot of times we are supporting each other, uplifting each other in spaces, and that in many ways people need multiple approaches to address Muslim inclusion, and that sometimes at the same sometimes we have different lanes, like types of organizations that we work with and that we're best suited to partner with.
Okay, all right. And
Mhm.
Muslim Arc, like it's headquartered in Southern California, but how broad are the operations from geographical perspective?
We are a national organization, and so our board members are across the country, our trainers are across the country. So currently, we have a trainer in New York and one in Florida. And then our partners do fly us out, or we either go on location with our partners across the country, or we deliver webinars across the country. We also, when we recruit fellows, like our fellows are throughout the country. So from Philadelphia to Ohio and California. So like our work has always been very deeply local in Southern California, Detroit, and on the East Coast. But it's also like very national, as we worked within the national Muslim scene to support national organizations in their inclusion efforts.
Mhm. If you look back 11 years of
Mhm.
work that you have done, what impact do you think Muslim ARC has made?
Yeah, I mean, it's been such an amazing journey. One of the things that does make us a little unique from some of the other Muslim inclusion firms is that we've worked within Muslim communities to live by our values. So, right, as we work to have be Muslim inclusion, we've worked to support Muslim institutions becoming more inclusive and more effective in their advocacy work and their narrative change work. And so that includes pushing for more representation of historically marginalized voices. So, for example, like our work on uplifting Black and Latino communities has really marked a shift in both staffing in Muslim-led organizations and the types of coalitions that Muslim organizations are forming across the country with Black, Latino, and Asian groups, and most recently within the national strategy on Islamophobia of partnering with some of the largest with the largest racial justice organization, Race Forward, to create a curriculum on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism that really supports like our student movements, our pro-Palestine um, movement that we have to address like how Islamophobia is impacting all of us. So this is the kind of work that I think it is been deeply impactful, to see different movies made, to see people draw on our research to and the scholarship, like they were able to take our study, which was the first national study on interethnic relations. And when
Mhm.
I had and Dr. Kayla Wheeler, when she was in graduate school, she had said that when she was able to show our study for many years, her advisor would not let her do doctoral research on Muslims. But that study was actually evidence that, hey, this was something that was important to do. And so to see the kind of work that has come out of that and publications, and that this is culminating right now and seeing a documentary around American Muslims and how we can tell our diverse stories. That has
Mhm.
been very powerful, of showing that American Muslims have always been here, right? And that we are interwoven in a narrative of what America is and who Americans are. And so, to be able to be um, either an impetus, inspiration, and the support that work has been truly rewarding.
Okay, no, that's great. So you mentioned about the research, doing
Mhm,
some research, and also running some workshops. Can
mhm.
you just briefly share with us the depth of services that you provide?
Yeah, so we provide trainings within 3 tracks. So we have hundreds of hours of curriculum training. So on our first track, one of our most popular is our anti-racism competency.
Hmm.
And so we developed that in 2018 and piloted that at the Muslim Power Building Project, which was a community organizing training. So even there, to be able to build our capacity for community organizers has been really important for us. With the anti-racism competency, we have about 36 hours of curriculum for that. And what it does do, it provides the tools for it's a education track for leadership development, for people working in nonprofits, the social impact field to be able to intervene in systemic discrimination at all levels, whether it's like internally, interpersonally, or institutionally. Our other track is our critical Islamophobia, where we provide a historical lens for our partners to understand anti-Muslim discrimination and oppression. And
Hmm.
what that has done is really shifted the field within philanthropy, is it was sometimes difficult for funders to fund Muslim social change on racial justice dockets. But what we know is that Muslims experience racialized disparities on all levels, from the medical field,
Hmm.
within the political representation, education, job discrimination. And so for us to really root our work within that, that has really marked a shift, and we've supported moving of millions of dollars towards Muslim social change within the social change sector. The other track that's very near and dear to us is our K-12 track. And that is where we have trainings on positive Muslim identity with our All from Adam track, and also our Salam Protectors, our Peace Protectors, which teaches anti-bullying within, and we started out with Muslim schools, but this is
Hmm.
also applicable. Oh, sorry, my cat's in the background. So this is all applicable um, to outside of Muslim schools. So we're looking at broadening our offerings towards
Hmm.
public schools, of empowering our young people to address anti-Muslim discrimination, racial discrimination, but in a way, right, that like really encourages students to hold each other with a lot of love and a lot of care, and to do better, right? So those three tracks have been very powerful. And our final track that we've done with Take on Hate and at ICNYU is our Race Identity series. And that allows for these intercommunal discussions of diverse people to talk about their shared experiences and to explore how they may have internalized oppression, and to commit to each other, commit um, to supporting each other through whatever challenges ahead. So we still feel like right now our race identity series is definitely important. We utilize that in our networking events and our programs to foster community support, to do hate reduction. And together those four tracks have really supported a number of clients. So some of our clients include Disney, it includes Ford Foundation, Minidoka Pilgrimage, organizations like Moms Rising, um, international refugee communities. So it's like we've had a range of amazing clients who do really great work in supporting the Muslim staff. When we've come and to hear from our Muslim staff to say, we really appreciate you and we needed you here, that has been so rewarding for us.
Okay, all right. No, thanks for doing all this great work. You're definitely a leader in the inclusion professionals community. What advice would you give to them seeking to expand their understanding of religious diversity and create policies that support Muslim employees?
I think it's very important for employers to know that that Muslims have multiple identities, right? We're not a monolith, and that they need to know that be like lean in with curiosity, right? Sometimes people are afraid to offend or ask, but it's like if we start to do our own homework, learn more, be open towards exploring. So for example, there is this documentary, the American Muslims. So watch that, learn more about Muslims. Do surveys to explore, make sure that you're including questions around faith identity, right? Because that can mean a lot to people. Like, how are they engaging with their faith identity? Because they never know. Like, for example, I have a very Anglo name. And so, for some people, if they're not visibly Muslim, they may still need religious accommodations. And so you can't assume who is and who isn't a Muslim.
Okay. All right. And last but not the least,
Mhm.
you are a nonprofit organization.
Mhm.
How can we support MuslimARC?
We are currently running a very urgent um, fundraiser, and donating to support our work will go a long way towards ensuring that we could provide the resources for our community, for our leaders to be able to show up at this time. And it's so important for your Muslim staff to have the tools to be able to address discrimination. And so being able to provide those tools, it costs, right? And we need your support to develop those resources and tools that are coming from us, right? And this is the best way that you can support us right now, is donating to support our urgent end of the year fundraiser. We have our campaign called Unite. So it is like Unite to Fight Racism. And that is like to understand racial justice, nurture resilience, inspire change, train leaders, and empower our communities. And so you can go to our website at www.muslimarc.org/donate. And I guarantee you your donation will be multiplied a thousandfold, because our team is doing such amazing work, and our impact is reverberating not just in the United States but globally. People are downloading our resources, are utilizing our resources um, to empower their youth, to empower their workers in ways that can support Muslim inclusion and intercultural dialogue, and to better our working workplace, but also our communities as a whole. Our faith-based communities need this work so badly, and I'm getting a lot of requests. So we need your support to create those resources.
All right. So those who are watching, please go online and support the work that Marguerite is doing. The URL is you would see the URL for the organization in the ticker there, MuslimARC.org, and it's just MuslimARC.org/donate. All right. Thank you so much, Margaret, for
Thank you,
sharing
Patrick.
all the knowledge and experience with us, and providing us perspective on how things are right now, and what we are looking into, how they are going to change in the near future, and how we can be more involved in making a positive change within our community and for every community, because inclusion is something, it's not just related to Muslims, it's for anybody. It's a great work that you are doing, and thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Kasha, for doing such amazing work and in strengthening our sector.
Yeah, thank you so much. Sonic.
Walaikum salam.